Week 15 is in the books, so that means it's time to hit those waiver wires to find players that could add value to the back end of your rosters. And first and foremost, I want to highlight a couple of players that are already highly rostered, but not exactly 100% that I think need to be. And that includes Cooper Rush, quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, Khalil Herbert, running back for the Cincinnati Bengals, Jalen McMillan, wide receiver for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Calvin Austin, wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Ben Sinnott, tight end for the Washington Commanders, Jatavion Sanders, tight end for the Carolina Panthers, and Noah Gray, tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs. Again, all these guys are rostered in well over 90% of Dynasty leagues out there, but not exactly 100%. So double check your waiver wires and add these guys if they are available. All right, we had some big time injuries this week, and perhaps none greater than the ankle injury to Patrick Mahomes, one that is already labeling him as week to week, despite Andy Reid claiming that Mahomes could have kept playing if they needed him to, but they were already winning by too much with too little time left, so they held him out. Personally, I find it hard to believe that Mahomes will play again during the regular season, as all the Chiefs really care about is making and winning the Super Bowl. So if Mahomes is done for the fantasy football season, then we get Carson Wentz back into our lives for better or for worse. And look, I get it. It is Carson Wentz, but I would bet that he's going to be willing to sling the ball, and he might be trying to play for another shot at a starting job somewhere else too. So especially in this offense with these weapons around him, and he gets a Texans defense that prior to this week against Tua had allowed 5 straight 20-plus point fantasy performances to quarterbacks and 6 in their last 8 games. Plus then the Steelers in championship week, who have now also allowed 3 straight 20-plus point games to quarterbacks and now might not have TJ Watt that week depending on the severity of his foot injury this weekend. All I'm saying is that Carson Wentz may not be the hero that your fantasy team deserves, but he might be the one that you may need right now.
I never said thank you.
And you'll never have to.
But anyway, moving on, Will Levis is bad. This is not new information, but it has now gotten to the point that Tennessee has turned to Mason Rudolph to be their starting quarterback, or at least he got the call this week in a near blowout loss to Cincinnati. If Tennessee sticks with Rudolph moving forward, he honestly is not a terrible option either if you really need a starter in Superflex or 2 quarterback leagues. In his 3 starts for Levis this year, Rudolph put up 9, 19, and 17 fantasy points, throwing for over 240 yards in 2 of those games and accounting for 2 touchdowns in those 2 games as well. And in essentially 1.5 quarters of play this weekend, Rudolph put up 209 yards and 2 touchdowns against a soft Bengals defense, and Rudolph did well against the other 2 mediocre defenses he faced earlier this year too. So if he were to remain the starter for the rest of the year, he gets Indianapolis this week in week 16 and then Jacksonville in week 17. So again, he is not a terrible Hail Mary option if you really need the start at quarterback. Now moving on to running back, basically any and all running back pickups from here until championship week are just gonna be potential handcuff options in case of injuries to starters above them. The big pickup this week is DJ Dallas, who's now with the Arizona Cardinals, and after Amari DiMercado was placed on injured reserve before this week's game, and now Trey Benson left the game with an ankle injury. So assuming that Benson is now out for the rest of the year, Dallas would be the handcuff to James Conner. And on the chance that Conner were to miss any games at all this year for fantasy football, Dallas could have a huge role in the offense as the primary ball carrier and receiver out of the backfield. If anything, he is a pickup now, and then you can just drop them before week 18 or before the end of the year. Now moving on to 2 more speculative ads for handcuffs. Deonta Foreman and Jamal Williams could be sneaky ads as potential RB2s in their offenses now based on injuries above them. The big injury, of course, was Nick Chubb leaving the game with a broken foot and will 100% be done for the year. So really sorry to hear that for Nick Chubb, but for Cleveland, that means that Jerome Ford is once again going to be the starter, and now Foreman could be his backup and handcuff for the final couple weeks. Then in New Orleans, Alvin Kamara left the game early with a groin injury, moving the relatively newly activated Kendre Miller as the presumed RB1 and then Jamal Williams as his backup. Now, of course, it is possible that Alvin Kamara is completely fine and finishes the season, but just in case if not, Williams is potentially one Kendre Miller injury away from also being in a workhorse role. And as the injuries just continue to pile up this week, Jalen Waddle left the game early with a knee injury, potentially opening up an opportunity for Malik Washington to showcase his talents and play a bigger role in this Dolphins offense, which he did actually have when Jalen Waddle left this week's game. Washington led all Dolphins receivers this week in receiving yards, hauling in 5 catches for 52 yards on 6 targets. Now, he was 4th on the team in total targets with those 6 targets, but he made the most of it, and if that usage continues or even grows with Jalen Waddle sidelined, Malik Washington could be a sneaky start during the playoffs, especially in leagues that start 10 to 12 players or more. He's already very highly rostered though at just above 90%, but if he is available in your league, he is a must add this week for basically everybody, and he also makes a very intriguing offseason stash this season. Then finally at the tight end position is a player that I actually feel confident picking up on waivers and starting in my lineup during the fantasy playoffs if needed. Brenton Strange has been excellent in the place of Evan Ingram this year, doing well at the beginning of the year, averaging 9 PPR points per game from weeks 2 through 5, and then this past weekend put up 73 yards on 11 receptions, finishing as 2nd on the team in targets behind only Brian Thomas Jr. And that's basically the equation for Jacksonville to close out the year. It's Brian Thomas Jr. and Brenton Strange, with Mac Jones just chucking the ball to try to save everybody's jobs for 2025. And it also doesn't hurt that the Jaguars get the Raiders and the Titans over the next 2 weeks. So if Brenton Strange is still somehow on your waiver wire, he needs to be added to potentially play now in your starting lineup, but also makes for a fantastic 2025 stash.